Good morning, Sarah. Good morning, Rose. Good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you to the two of you. Thank you to everyone for joining us this morning. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you to Lucy. It's always a pleasure to listen to Lucy, not least because she's such a tremendous advocate for the industry and such an entertaining and natural speaker. We need more of you in the industry, Lucy. I think we need to find some sort of replication technology. And I love the fact that you use phrases like joined up thinking, which is something I batter the Commission and others with quite regularly. So bravo to you. Anyway, back to other matters. So what I want to talk about a little bit today is how our industry should respond in a different way to the changed circumstances of today. I'm going to speak from a European perspective. That's what I am. I'm the president of Eurominds. The world has changed, of course it has. I don't need to elaborate on that. But our industry faces a different suite of uncertainties beyond simply economics and practical issues such as supply chains. There's a conference running parallel to this. It's on as we speak, run by the FT. It's called the Global Boardroom. They had a very interesting session on Monday about global supply chains. Perspectives are very, very different today. We haven't come to a unified consensus. What's interesting is how our customers, our ultimate customers and our stakeholders are being affected by this. We talk about confinement, we talk about trade and travel restrictions, but there's also mental changes. It's not just physical. All of you wonderful geologists know so much about rocks and other things, of course. I think you were too self-deprecating, Sarah, I think. But I think one very simple fact is that in today's confined world, where we all sit at home in our wonderful locations, rocks didn't just arrive when somebody switched on a lonely screen. We know that. The whole production process of what we do for a living, all of us, be we engineers, financiers, geologists, whatever, is difficult, it's complex. And the issue today is, have we become further away because of the coronavirus from our stakeholders, from our ultimate clients, from the people we work with, than we were before? So have we become a dinosaur, a fossil, to continue your geological theme? Some people would say yes. With climate change and other challenges also, yes. So is it the way what we do, or is it the way we express what we do that has become out of time? We've got great creativity, diligence, patience, rigor, application, excellence in so many things we do in our industry, but we don't seem to have taken those attributes with us to communication. People like Lucy are an honorable exception, but the norm is not the case. I'm sorry to say that. If you look at what we call ESG, and if any of the participants are not familiar with the term, please send a note. Basically, environment, sustainability, and governance issues. It's a movement. It's not coalesced yet. It's not coherent yet. Most people have a general idea of what it is, but it means different things to different people. And there are lots of valid criticisms you can make of ESG. We can say it's all being driven by demands for input standards and certifications by our customers, and by opportunism by those nasty bankers following the drenching of sin that they inflicted upon themselves and the rest of the world in 2008. Yes, really? There are other factors, honestly, boys and girls, the largest of which is that consumers and governments actually do want to change the way we live. It's a fact. And the pandemic has just brought that even closer to us. Governments today, because of COVID-19, are much more involved in industry than in ways that we couldn't have even imagined even weeks ago. Excuse me. Expectations and agendas have also changed, both in terms of finance, in terms of regulation, and entire supply and demand chains. What will people expect? State intervention will be the norm for some time. We'd better get used to it. Already, France and the Netherlands within the European Union have called for much tougher trade conditions. There's going to be a recalibration of what we understand to be fair competition as we respond to these new uncertainties. This is already being articulated in something that's called the European Recovery Plan and in changed industrial policy. I would refer you to a recent interview by Commissioner Breton in the FT. Europe is becoming much more active in shortening and strengthening supply chains, and also at the same time responding to public concerns. There's something called the European Green Deal, and that remains very much part of it. We're being forced to change our everyday behaviour. In terms of mining, there are obviously two aspects of the change, one of which was articulated by Lucy and by other presenters. The massive amount of products that we are going to have to deliver to enable the transition to greener energy and industry. That's fantastic, of course it is. The second is the requirement that we ourselves change our business in order to become greener. But that's not the whole story. The current economic shock will create greater trade barriers and resource nationalism, for sure. We'd be foolish to assume otherwise. But cash is also already in shorter supply, so competition for investment capital is intensifying. This presents the elephant in the room: greater volatility in commodity prices. Now that, in terms of an electorate, is very difficult to deal with. Now, in practical terms, that has meaning at our mines, at mine sites. Why? Because regionally, locally, this is where fiscal pressure, taxation, state spending changes, the effect on everyday people will really bite. So we need to recognize that rather than continue to talk generally or internationally. We tend to make rather broad statements. We used to talk in terms of something called the social license. It's a rather threadbare phrase now. And I don't say that because I'm against the idea. It's because of how our industry used it. We bundled everything into this sack that we called externalities. And in truth, we really just prioritize the bottom line. Not anymore. Our profit isn't enough. It's not enough for our customers, it's not enough for governments, it's not enough for our investors. And when the people who actually own our businesses rather than run them, and this is rather important, we, and particularly senior management, really ought to take notice. So what? Many companies would claim they're way ahead of this thinking. What the hell does this guy think he's talking about? We already deploy and nurture the highest standards. We have great sustainability reporting. We meet every supply chain criteria imaginable. We don't do business with nasty dictators or child employers, etc., etc. We engage with all manner of ethical investors. Those are your measures. They're your measures. As supply chains shorten, look, the European Commission is, for example, expected and is actually already presenting an initiative on mandatory due diligence for companies, not just mining companies, all companies. That means we're going to have to actually check on our supply chain. Yes, some of you do it already, it's true, to an extent. The idea is to identify, prevent, mitigate, and account for human rights abuses, environmental damage, etc. But that will expand, that will exchange. Don't think you can limit it just to the agenda that you choose. Competition policy will broaden and change. This criticality, well mentioned by several participants so far, takes on a much more everyday and substantive meaning. In terms of raw material supply, you're going to see, there was a quotation from Commissioner Šefčovič in Lucy's presentation, you're going to see further initiatives such as the Battery Alliance. We don't need to say sorry. Ignorance and our passing things are not something we can hide behind anymore. We need to take ownership of them instead. Engagement, as we understand it, can't mean just the industry talking to ourselves. That becomes what's another overused phrase, an echo chamber. What we need to do in terms of engagement is encompass whole vertical chains from our suppliers down to our customers and the ultimate end users. That's because today's decision makers, not yesterday's decision makers, context, their terms of reference, their priorities, their language, it doesn't chime easily with industry as we have understood it. They fear different things, and that reflects a new consensus, whether we like that or not. And we need to see that as an opportunity, not a threat. By definition, an industry approach can then capture far more attention by repositioning itself within rather than apart from customers' daily lives. That's already happening. It's easy to do that on a national basis. You can say Team Sweden or Team Austria or Team, I'm going to use only European countries, Team Malta. That would be interesting. Some companies have already realized the opportunity of doing that. You demonstrate not only corporate responsibility, but corporate resilience that way. But you also recognize that your own relationships are key. More collaboration, more collegiality in your own backyard, perhaps. Work with your real friends. That forces critics to contend with a bigger picture. And then you can't just use a single issue that you can export and then sanitize. Yes, that chimes with the Green Deal, it chimes with the ESG and the climate change agenda, and it makes us part of it. We shouldn't leave it to the finance sector and others to set an industrial agenda. Having been a financier for many years, I don't recommend it. I've also been, thankfully, a director and chairman of mining companies for rather longer, and I know whose view I prefer. We've got to talk to the NGOs. They're not terrorists. They're not, in many ways, they're not competent. They may be frustrating. They may lack scientific competence. They may be even less transparent than the companies they criticize. But they do telescope the fears and ideas of ordinary people, our customers. We need to talk with them. We have to talk with them. We do talk with them today in Europe. If I look at the European Parliament, if I look at the cabinets of individual commissioners, I see former advocates for environmental causes. I see people who have not worked in industry, who have not worked in finance, who do not conceive of what we do in the same way as us and the people we work with. If we don't talk with them, how can understanding grow? Investors, regulators, trade unions. We talk with those people all the time. Strangely enough, we don't seem to talk with our customers very often. We need to work on that. I speak from a European perspective. I'm not talking about that dreadful word Brexit. I'm not talking about anything else. I talk about Europe as a whole, a Europe of 500 million people, a Europe that still sets standards, a Europe that the rest of the world still can't ignore. We deliver so many good things in Europe, all of us, all of the European countries, whether they're within the Union or not. And we deliver those in this industry as well. We need to show people, however, how that delivery translates into their everyday lives. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to my sermon. I've noticed a few questions. I haven't read them yet, so I will switch over to that now. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Mark, that was absolutely beautiful. Thank you very, very much. And
I'm blushing.
You can imagine the phenomenal applause that is coming at you from the other side of those muted microphones at the moment. Yes, there is information and there's the questions coming through on Chatter on a number of different streams here. Now, there are so many aspects that it would be phenomenal to dive into with regards to what you just so eloquently put to us just now. But one question that I'd have for you is you called for an industry-wide approach to be able to get this better understanding of those different stakeholders, be able to perhaps tell and sell and understand that story of what's going on in a better way. We've got lots and lots of different players, all of whom are perhaps doing different bits of that industry-wide puzzle. How do we either pull it all together, or do we all align behind one group that's pushing forward that initiative? How do we actually make this happen?
There was a rather lovely outraged comment from someone who's obviously in the finance industry. I don't diminish the ESG idea. In fact, I'm part of it. Is that the way of bringing all this together? Look, I think it has to be, in today's world, a partnership. It has to be a partnership between the private and public sector, and we have to recognize that. I think we look at the battery alliance that Lucy alluded to. There's likely to be similar cooperations, be there at a national level, be there internationally. There's lots of good work already being done by various fora, by the OECD, by others. So it would be unfair of me to single out anyone. I think the way we bring together the quality of everyone in the room is by focusing them on individual tasks. I think, you know, I went into a parents' meeting recently with my 11-year-old son, and we went to see his computing teacher. And my son likes computing. And I'd never met his teacher. Didn't even know his name. And there was a piece of paper above his name. His name was Mr. Carey, and his initial was S. So it said Mr. Scary above his name. And quite apart from that being quite deliciously silly, it really illustrates the point. We've got to demystify what a lot of people do. To answer one of the questions that has just popped up on the chat, I don't think geoscientists will be redundant at all in the face of climate change. I think quite the opposite. I think quite the opposite. I think what we need to do is actually build on knowledge. We need to invest in knowledge, and I think there is an incredible gestalt in the European governments to say, good God, we've got competence. We do actually make lots of things. We've got resources. We've got all these universities full of these really clever people. Why are we exporting all of this knowledge for other people to develop it? I sat on a conference panel not so long ago with an Australian gentleman from a well-known EPCM contracting firm. I'm not going to say who it was. And in typically articulate Antipodean style, he said, in front of a very learned audience, you know, we're really good at implementing things. You invent effing everything in Europe. And that's about right. We do. Europe really needs to concentrate on what we do. Our intellectual capital is just as valuable as our natural resources. And if you deploy that, then you'll bring everyone together. You've just got to deploy it properly. So that's a long answer to a short question.
Brilliant. No, but that was a fabulous answer all the same. Thank you very, very much, Mark.